Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Liberal Democrats went into the last election pledging to repeal the controversial Investigatory Powers Act, the legislation that had been referred to as the Snoopers Charter. But does the party still feel the same way about surveillance powers in the wake of recent terrorist attacks? Emma Vardy's been testing the mood at the LibDem Conference.
There have been 5 terror attacks in 2017. It's the most sustained period of terror activity in England since the IRA bombing campaign of the 1970s. So in light of that, we're here to ask conference delegates whether they believe our surveillance powers are too strong or too weak.
I think it's too strong, unless you can see a payoff, but I don't see that. I don't believe that we're safer. I think it makes governments feel safer. I don't think it makes people feel safer.
I'd say far too strong. I think it's a fundamental liberal value that we have the freedom to pursue our rights, particularly on the internet. That's why I think that the Lib Dems have such a problem with the Snoopers Charter in particular. It's a fundamental infringement on our rights that have so many better ways of dealing with the problem.
It's not about whether it's strong or weak, because of course everyone wants strong surveillance laws. It's whether intrusive laws are necessarily the most strong.
We'd like to know whether you think the UK's surveillance powers are too strong or too weak.
Ultimately, where does it lead? If we've got an autocratic state, if we end up with a Donald Trump, at what point do these surveillance techniques become methods of controlling the population?
Why too strong?
Too strong because the Snoopers Charter is like trying to find a needle in a haystack by making the haystack 10 times as big.
Not necessarily. Sometimes these powers are targeted at suspects.
I think targeted powers are absolutely fine, but the government's approach to it by just looking to mine data indiscriminately isn't targeted.
It can help with criminal cases, but we didn't always have this level of monitoring. It's something that's crept up on us.
Are you Googling the answer?
Yeah.
Having stronger surveillance isn't going to necessarily make us any safer.
Well, you don't need surveillance powers to see which way this is going. Fabulous outfit.
Thank you.
You've gone against the grain. Tell us why.
Because I think actually, on balance, if our powers were stronger, maybe some of the incidents that we've seen recently might have been avoided. I know that the government does, intercept and stop a number of things, but actually there's a lot that still goes on under the radar, and I'm not arguing for kind of police state 24-hour supervision, but I think actually maybe more does have to be done in the current circumstance we're living in.
They are too strong.
Could you really see us, though, softening surveillance powers at a time like this?
I don't think it's about softening. I think it's about stopping the rampage that the government wants to put on our civil liberties.
It's clear Big Brother is not welcome at the Liberal Democrat conference. People here voted overwhelmingly to say they believe UK surveillance powers are too strong.
Emma Vardy there. Well, we're joined now from the Liberal Democrat conference in Bournemouth, which looks lovely, actually, by the Liberal Democrat frontbencher Tom Brake. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us, Tom. You may have listened to our very scientific mood box there, but overwhelmingly, Lib Dems obviously feel very hostile to any more surveillance powers. Do you think, though, that the policy needs to have a rethink when we're in the middle of the worst terror campaign since the 1970s?
Well, first of all, the reasons our members are concerned is over issues to do with privacy, whether judges have sufficient oversight, whether, for instance, encryption, given how much we rely on that for things like banking, is something that should be scrapped. So that's the reason they've got concerns. What I should also point out, of course, is that in coalition, the Liberal Democrats, we ensured that the Secret Services received the funding that they needed and took many measures to ensure, for instance, that people could be stopped from going to Syria, their passports could be removed. So we have both, I think, protected privacy, but also given the powers where they're needed.
Right, but you're not going to pick up lots of votes from people whose primary concern in life is stopping their internet service providers from storing some of their data for a year, are you?
Well, I would challenge you on that. There are clearly a large number of people who are worried about privacy issues. And for instance, what we have seen often with, for instance, commercial companies, when their databases have been hacked, that has caused a huge amount of concern for the people affected, whether it's TalkTalk, for instance, and other commercial companies. So we want to prevent that happening, and if the government do create a massive database, given the data breaches there have been in the past, that is a risk of something that could happen again in the future.
But I put to you that doesn't necessarily reflect the broad public mood when, as I said before, we are in the middle of a very dangerous terror campaign. I mean, isn't it just a little bit like Brexit, that the party is just not in touch with what people are thinking? I mean, you're the party's Brexit spokesman. Norman Lamb, your colleague, said recently a lot of people felt you were treating them like idiots for having voted to leave.
Well, I've never done that in relation to people who voted for leave. I understand the reasons they've
except
done that.
You're telling them they're wrong. It's the wrong. It was the wrong
poor
answer.
Housing. I just happen to disagree with the outcome of the referendum. That doesn't mean I'm saying that leave voters are stupid. Just in relation to security issues, I think if people look at our track record, actually we've been willing to put the money in when it's required, and some of the things that the government have wanted to do, the Secret Service have actually said, well, we don't really need that. So, and the government have not really come forward with the evidence to support their case. It's also, I think, worth saying that on something like, for instance, vetting of people who come from, refugees who come to the United Kingdom, there is a strict process in place. But if, for instance, there is evidence that failed in some respect in relation to any recent cases, then of course that is something that we would want to be reviewed.
Right, but let's stick with Brexit for a moment, because if your colleague in the Liberal Democrat Party thinks you're treating Leave voters as idiots, he has obviously felt that or noticed it on the doorstep. I mean, should you not recognise people's anxieties about the European Union, which are clearly legitimately felt? I mean, last week we saw Jean-Claude Juncker, his federalist dream, if you like, laid out in full: a single European president, a single Eurozone finance minister, more Schengen. Why shouldn't people have anxieties about that sort of remote power?
Well, I share some of those concerns, and frankly, Vince Cable and I have both said that the most helpful contribution Mr. Juncker could make to this issue of the European Union is to keep his mouth shut.
Right, right. Have you said that to him then?
Well, I don't know whether he watches your show. But,
I'm sure he does. He watches
it.
He watches it along with all sorts of high-level people, I'm sure, in the EU and here. But, I mean, why, though, if you're so desperate to cling to that European Union, you will be buying into all those things?
Well, no, we won't, because, of course, what Mr. Juncker may say isn't, in fact, what the France and Germany will want to happen. So he may have a grand vision, or indeed some have said visions, but I think in reality, the sort of federalist approach that he is adopting is one that, I mean, I can't see, for instance, Poland and Hungary queuing up to help deliver his vision. So he made a speech, but in reality, the European Union is not going to move in the direction that he wants.
And what evidence is there that the public is going to move in the direction that you want when it comes to Brexit?
Well, that clearly for us is an issue in terms of the level of support for us as a party and the level of support for the referendum on the terms of the deal, which we're pushing for. I guess our view is that as we start to see things unravel, we've just had our Foreign Secretary in effect announcing that he wants a completely different approach adopted in relation to Brexit, and this is 15 months into the negotiations that we're having with the European Union, with really only 12 months to go. So talking to EU diplomats earlier today, they are completely confused about what the UK government is seeking to negotiate, and I guess support what Mr. Barnier has said, that he is trying to negotiate with fresh air, and that is a very difficult thing to do.
Well, to quote you, your own words back to you, you say you're seeing things unravel. That's the Liberal Democrat position, isn't it? We hope everything goes wrong, and then we'll pick up votes.
No, we don't hope everything goes wrong. Clearly, we want the negotiations to be a success.
Right.
But the reality is that on something like the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, we know that the Irish government and the EU think that nothing the UK government have put forward so far in any shape or form is going to be satisfactory. So I'm afraid the evidence is that there's not an awful lot of progress that is being made by David Davis, Liam Fox and Boris Johnson.
Although there are arguments there saying it's very difficult to make any decisions over the border, as you outlined, between Ireland and Northern Ireland, unless you do the free trade deal at the same time. And that's a problem with sequencing, which is the way the negotiations have been set out. Just finally, before you go, do you think tuition fees are too high?
No, I think that the proposals, for instance, that would see them reduced would simply benefit richer students. What we want to see is the government restore many of the policies that we had implemented with the tuition fees changes, including, for instance, very substantial support for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and unfortunately the government have scrapped that.
Tom Brake, thank you. Enjoy the sunshine as it looks behind you there in Bournemouth.
Well, Vince Cable has said that he could be Prime Minister, and in the last few minutes, his predecessor as Liberal Democrat leader, Tim Farron, has accused the Conservatives of breaking Britain in order to get immigration down. That's what's happening at the Lib Dem Party conference in Bournemouth, and our senior political correspondent, Robert Nisbet, is there. Breaking Britain and Vince Cable as leader. How's that all going down with the faithful in Bournemouth?
Well, I think the Liberal Democrats were probably hoping to have their moment in the sun. They weren't expecting the whole Boris situation to be sucking up all of the oxygen in the political room at the moment. But there are a number of different former leaders who are knocking around the Lib Dem conference today. We've seen Ming Campbell. We understand Nick Clegg is here. But Tim Farron has just passed the baton on to Vince Cable today. And Vince Cable doing a media round of interviews, including on Sky News as well, where he said it was perfectly plausible to portray himself as a possible Prime Minister. And I think the whole tone of this conference has been Vince Cable taking the reins of the party and establishing the tone and the direction. Clearly, Brexit is a big issue that dominates, and certainly when you talk to delegates, they only want to talk about Brexit, but it appears that Vince Cable wants to talk about Brexit, but also other things as well, reducing inequality, and that has led to some disquiet amongst some of the more passionate Remainers in the party who would really like to see him more fully committed to taking charge and trying to end the process of Brexit rather than tinker around the edges. So Vince Cable has to try and get that side of the party behind him, while also trying to convince some of the more sceptical delegates, some of whom we've spoken to on Sky News, who believe that he is still tainted by what happened in the coalition, by tuition fees, which Vince Cable himself referred to in a question and answer session yesterday as the elephant in the room. So it hasn't been an entirely comfortable conference for Vince Cable so far, but of course he's got his big speech tomorrow and expect him to really turn his guns on the government, on Boris, but also look at Brexit and make a passionate argument to stay within the single market. But as I say, there are some here who would really like him to be even more committed to ending the process, reversing Article 50 entirely, rather than this campaign slogan that they've been trying out over the past few days about exiting Brexit.
Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Now, the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Vince Cable, has claimed that Theresa May is letting the country down over the Brexit talks, describing the government as unprepared and totally divided. Earlier, his predecessor, Tim Farron, told the party's conference in Bournemouth that Brexit would turn Britain into a poorer, meaner, insular place. But can the Lib Dems turn their pro-EU stance into an electoral asset? We'll hear from Vince Cable in a moment. First, our political correspondent Michael Crick reports on a party struggling for a fight back.
The Liberal Democrats meet here in Bournemouth in the trough of unpopularity. Yes, they went up from 8 seats to 12 at the June election, but their share of the vote, 7.4%, was the lowest for almost 60 years.
Oh, thank you.
Today, their outgoing leader, Tim Farron, tried to cheer them up.
If you have joined this party as a fast track to a career in politics, then your career's officer wants sacking. This is not the place if you want an easy life. It is the place to be if you want to make a difference.
This is the only one of the three main UK parties still firmly for Remain. And Farron had this for Boris Johnson.
Patriots are never populists, because patriots tell their country the truth. It is a treacherous act to tell lies to your country. Boris.
The centre ground in British politics is sparsely populated right now, and he urged Social Democrats in Labour ranks to join them.
You have lost your party for at least a generation. Your party has left you. It is time for you to leave it.
I've got to judge his feet.
Vince Cable could barely muster a football team with his current MPs, but yesterday he said it's perfectly plausible he could become PM.
How does he become Prime Minister from here?
Well, he has a great deal of credibility. He talks a lot of sense.
And 12 seats?
Well, it's a long stretch, but...
he hasn't got that long.
Everybody thought that the Tories were going to have a runaway victory at the last general election, and it didn't happen. People are saying that it's implausible that Vince Cable will become the next Prime Minister. Who knows what's going to happen in these turbulent political times?
One consolation is the Lib Dems now have more than 100,000 members, an all-time high. So most members joined since the election 2 years ago.
How old are you?
18.
You're 18? And what made you join the Liberal Democrats?
Well, in the long term, I want to fight for a more free and open society, and joining the Liberal Democrats was the only way I could think of in politics to do that.
You say in the long term. How long is that? About 50 years?
Well, I don't know how many years I've got in me, but hopefully that's a long time.
But isn't this idea of it being plausible, as he says, that Vince Cable could become Prime Minister, just a joke?
No, we're the third UK party.
Yeah. Well, you're quite a long way behind the others.
Look at Canada.
Yeah.
Look at Canada. Justin Trudeau was nowhere to be seen, and now he's leading it.
And tomorrow, Sir Vince will tell delegates how they can make the Lib Dems a party of government again. Michael Crick, Channel 4 News, Bournemouth.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Lib Dem leader, Sir Vince Cable, and I asked him for his reaction to the debate amongst Tory ranks over Brexit.
Well, it's a complete breakdown of discipline. I mean, whether or not you agree with Brexit or not, I mean, it's absolutely unforgivable that key members of the government should be publicly quarrelling about the basic direction that they're trying to go in. They're supposed to be in the middle of some very sensitive and difficult negotiation. I don't understand why Boris Johnson wasn't sacked this morning. I mean, any head teacher faced with a riot in the school would have done something decisive, and she's done absolutely nothing.
So she may be the head teacher, you know, barricaded in her office, but you're outside the school gates, and you're practically irrelevant in all of this.
No, we're not irrelevant at all. We represent an important strand of public opinion, a strand that I think will grow increasingly important. I think in the election, in a sense, many people are willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt, but when we get to the end of the negotiating process, particularly if we get a very bad outcome, as seems likely to be the case, I think the public will want a fresh choice. Do they want to press on with all this, or do they want an exit from Brexit? And that's the option we want to give them.
So you want a second referendum on the actual deal once it's been negotiated by the government, correct?
We want a first referendum on the facts, once we know what the outcome is going to be. I think it's rather different from simply rerunning the last one. It's an important distinction.
But there might be 17 million people in this country who voted to get out in the first referendum who would strongly disagree with you. I mean, it's a recipe for open warfare, isn't it?
No, not at all. They've got an opportunity to reaffirm their decision if that's what they want, once they know what the facts are and once they know what the government's negotiated. And, of course, if they reaffirm their decision, the issue will be closed. If they choose to change their mind, and they have a right to change their mind, we'll get a different outcome. That's the whole point.
And what's the future of the Lib Dems? What's your future? Do you actually see yourself as Prime Minister of this country one day?
Perfectly plausible. We have an open civil war in the Conservative Party. We have a suppressed civil war in the Labour Party. Politics is very, very volatile. We've seen in other Western democracies, notably Canada, our sister party coming from fourth to first. We've seen big changes in France that nobody predicted. I think in this very, very volatile environment, a party that, like ours, has got, you know, real experience of government, but is also producing radical ideas. I think that combination of things, sensible, moderate. Those kind of qualities, I think, will appeal to people in very dangerous times.
So are you the Emmanuel Macron of British politics?
Potentially. I'm a slightly different generation, but the principle is right, surely, that I can break through, and I have every intention of doing so.
Different generation is just one of the differences. I mean, you're a very well-known, established politician in this country. Macron came from the outside. He completely reinvented French politics. You're not about to do that, are you?
Well, he was an establishment figure. I mean, he was actually my opposite number when I was in the coalition government.
He served in government for 2 years.
That I used to deal with.
Ah.
He was in government, he was a member of the establishment, but indeed he remade politics, and we intend to remake British politics in the same way.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I've been